Cool.
Okay, Dylan, over to you.
Okay. Awesome. Thanks, Janet. Hello, everyone from slowly getting darker Kampala. My name's Dylan Patterson, and I'm volunteering with Hot Uganda on a project dealing with the refugee crisis in northern Uganda. While I'm in the States, I work with Apple as a data analyst and GIS technician. And I have about 2.5 years of OSM experience and around the same time of validating OSM data. So I think Janet can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think our purpose here today is to go over sort of remote validation. Janet brought up to me that her team deals with data entry directly into OSM via a mapping application called maps.me. And maybe OSM and as well, Janet, or just maps.me?
We're using maps.me.
Cool. So Janet was curious on some of the validation platforms, tools, techniques that are available and out there for everyone to use when it's not centered around necessarily a hot task or a gridded cell sort of task outline. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the hot tasking manager. That's typically how remote mapping tasks are sort of organized and handed out to missing maps and other groups and organizations. So it becomes a bit more difficult in OSM when you're not in that sort of structured environment to then track down and validate a user or a group of users' change sets and changes on the map. So this session today will be pretty informal. It's going to cover some web tools that we can use to find and validate change sets. And it's going to incorporate both a presentation and a live demo of those tools, specifically focused on OSMCHA. Any links or anything I talk about during this presentation, I'll make sure to send to Janet and have all of that forwarded on to the group at large after our meeting here today. And stop and let me know if you have any questions at any step of the way. I'm more than willing to answer them, and it's definitely informal, so you don't have to wait till I'm finished with a section or a slide to ask a question. Yeah, so with that, Janet, I don't know if you want people to introduce themselves or if you want me to go right into it, but I'm open to either. So
I suggest you go right into it. If people want to introduce themselves in the chat box,
yeah, it could always be done in the chat.
Thanks.
Perfect. Yeah, of course. Let me just make sure where we're at. Okay, cool. So I'll start with the PowerPoint. Can everyone see that, hopefully? Yeah, you're good? Cool. So I'm going to assume everyone can see the presentation I have in front of us. So it's on, let's see, let's make sure I have chat open. Cool, okay. So it's on remote validation and validating change sets in OSM. So it's going to cover some of the basics, and then we're going to move into slightly more technical stuff as we go along. But stop me and feel free to ask any questions along the way. So the outline, we're going to cover what is a change set in OSM, which I'm sure most, if not all of you know. Some review tools, which will be a list that I'll pass out at the end of the session. OSMCHA in bold, which will be our focus. And then OverPass and latest changes. Latest changes being a tool that runs off of OverPass and the OSM API, and just using OverPass Turbo in general to find and validate users' changes. So we'll kick it off here with what is a change set? It's essentially a group of changes made by a single user over a period of time. So this is taken straight from the OSM wiki. So it can include the addition of new elements to the map, or simply a change in attribution to existing elements, and also the removal of set elements. So on the right-hand side, you'll see a picture of what a change set will look like if you're viewing it on osm.org. You'll see the bounds of the change set itself, and then some information pertaining to the change set, such as the user that created it, any tags or information associated with it, and any features down below that were impacted by the change set itself. So there's numerous tools out there to review changes within OSM, and this is easily and by far an incomplete list of those tools. But some of the big ones that I typically like to use are OSMCHA, OverPass Turbo. Who Did It is a nice tool for finding out change sets and their bounding boxes around the globe. Latest changes, which we'll cover today. OverPass, obviously. Achavi is a visual diff viewer, much like what we'll see in OSMCHA in a little bit. And then there's a couple of tools at the bottom there. OSM Labs Deep History, and then PWU's Deep OSM History, and those deal with the history of particular features. So they'll go into diffs and changes of a given feature over all of its iterations, so every version, essentially. So those are super useful as well for seeing how a feature has changed over time. And I'll send out this list at the end, so don't worry about writing any of these links or URLs down. So getting into our main topic today, or this evening, is OSMCHA and filtering and finding change sets using that tool. So OSMCHA, what is it? It stands for OpenStreetMap Changeset Analyzer, and it's a web tool to help mappers analyze and review data changes made to OSM. It was initially made by an OSM user in South America by the name of Willie, and I forget his last name, and Mapbox quickly grew, it drew interest from Mapbox, who quickly invested in the project, and Mapbox now supports OSMCHA fully, with Willie, the initial creator, still making code commits and changes. It's an open source tool. You can find the API, the front end, and the back end on GitHub. And more information on those links, which again I'll send out at the end of this session. So filtering change sets through OSMCHA. In fact, if you want to follow along, feel free to go to OSMCHA. I believe I have that here. Let me just jump out of that really quick so I can give you guys the URL. And it's osmcha.mapbox.com. So let me just ping that to the chat really quick, and then I'll continue sharing. Cool. Okay. So if you can follow along on that link, OSMCHA is a pretty simple and easy to read user interface. The bread and butter of it is in filters. So OSMCHA, essentially how it works is it's recording diffs between OSM data, essentially recording all change sets that occur to the OSM database and stuffing that in its own, allowing you to further filter that and analyze that data. So OSMCHA and its entirety of its database only stretches back to its initial inception, which is a few years ago. So it doesn't have everything, and it certainly doesn't contain the amount of changes made to the map going back to OSM's inception, and not even as far back as OverPass can work, which I believe is till about 2012 when the license change occurred in OSM. So OSMCHA has all the change sets recorded in the world for about the last 2 years, I'd say, going up, continuing into the future. So it doesn't have everything, but it has most of the recent changes made to the OSM database. And with that subset or that set of OSM data, it allows you to filter through that with custom filters that are made easy to use in a really simple user interface. So it comes equipped with a number of filters. If you click on the filtering button found on the top left-hand pane, the right-hand view will actually change and bring up a filtering window, which comes with tons of pre-baked filters that allow you to filter through change sets using a variety of criteria. These can be combined to make very distinct and very precise filters, or they can be left very open and very broad, filtering the entire world for change sets over a given date range, or filtering a very specific spot by a very specific user over a very specific date range, stuff like that. So it's really up to you. I'm not going to go through all of the filters available on the list, but I will demo some of them in the sort of live portion of this session later on. Mapbox, again, is continuing to expand and rework this list, and they're definitely accepting feedback, and Willie, the initial creator of OSMCHA, is also accepting feedback via diary posts, direct messages, or on GitHub. So there's lots of ways to provide feedback on what changes you think should be there, or bugs that you see that you want fixed, and all that sort of stuff. One of the best things, and one of the use cases I think is most relevant to Janet's work, and potentially to yours as well, is the use of the user filter. So Janet has a team of OSM editors or field data collection workers who edit directly through maps.me. And they're, you know, if you're using OSM and or maps.me, particularly OSM and, Janet, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you make an edit through maps.me, are you using your specific OSM account or a generic maps.me account?
People are using OSM accounts, and many times there's things like Kigoma 1, Kigoma 2.
Right, exactly, okay. I remember there was some uproar in the early days of maps.me over like a generic account adding data to the map, but I'm sure that's changed. At any rate, if you have a group of editors who are adding data to the map and you have a list of their usernames, it's possible to create a filterable list in OSMCHA that allows you to view all of the changes occurring to the map by those specific editors. It's extremely valuable, again, when you're dealing with users outside the bounds of the hot tasking manager or a task management tool similar to that. When you've applied your filters, you can actually share and trade that URL. The query string that's generated from that URL is saved in the URL, and you can pass that along and bookmark it and actually keep that list of users available to you at any point in time for quick view of the changes they're making to the map. It'll update each time the page is refreshed, or just by hitting the little refresh button that you see right under the filter button. So it's pretty up to date. I'd say within 3 to 5 minutes of a change set occurring, you'll see it appear in the list, if not sooner. Another way to keep this in a more friendly and convenient and easy to use space is by saving it. So by signing in on OSMCHA, you have a small and really simple user dashboard related to your username, which is what we're seeing here on the right-hand side of the presentation. So there you can actually save comments for review, default for good and default for bad, and you can also save filters. So instead of bookmarking the link that you generate, you can actually just save a filter right from the OSMCHA interface, and that will show up here, and you'll have essentially a dashboard of filters. So you could have as many or as little filters as you need for your project, but they'll all show up here, and you can load into them and view them really quickly. So it's a nice little project dashboard that's really easy to use. Once you create a list via a filter or just using the general list that populates when you first land on OSMCHA, you're also able to order it. And you can order it by a number of different things. Some of the neat things include like the amount of objects created, modified, or deleted. Now, funny enough, if you can see on that image on our right, the green, the yellow, and the red indicate from left to right created, modified, and deleted. And that actually only indicates nodes currently. Last I checked, they have not expanded that to ways or relations. So although they do record way and relational changes, they do not report that in terms of those numerics that you see right there, those little change boxes. So that only deals with nodes. So that's an important thing to note. You can also filter by date and by ID as well. So there's a number of options to order your list on the left-hand side, and those orderings can also be saved in the they'll save automatically in the URL. So as you pass that along to other team members or other people, they'll see the list as you filtered it and also as you've ordered it, which makes it really nice. They don't have to go about reorganizing a list that you spent some time setting up. So once you have your list, or once you have your filter, or if you're just curious to explore a change set, that's really easy to do right off the bat from the user interface. So I guess I jumped ahead a little bit. You'll notice that I already spoke on the created, modified, or deleted portion. And again, that only deals with nodes. But clicking on a change set on the left-hand side will actually change the right-hand view to a visual diff viewer put together by Mapbox. So it's similar to a Chavi, if any of you are familiar with that tool that runs off the OverPass API. This is one developed by Mapbox, and they offer a number of ways to view the diffs generated by any given change set. So they color code them based on whether it was created, modified, or deleted, or even if only attribution or tags changed as well. You'll be able to see those details as you explore the various options in the diff view pane. So you'll be able to see tag changes by clicking on the hash. It'll give you a list of any attribution that changed. Also, by clicking on a feature rendered on the map, one of the vectors, you can also see if any attributes changed as well. It'll show you in a box on the bottom right-hand side what it was previously and what it went to in that change set. And it will show you the previous version, the previous user, and the current version and the current user as far as the change set's concerned. Oh, so it looks like we've increased our time for the meeting, Janet. Is that right? I just got a message for that.
Yes.
Okay, cool. So that's possible to see. I will continue here. You can also see discussions, and you can also leave and post discussions for a given change set. If you remember back to this slide where you can leave default comments for when you review them, those will actually populate after reviewing a change set here and allow you to post them. And they'll show up as a normal, typical change set discussion does on OSM. So they'll be viewable and you know, readable by other users, and other users can comment back and stuff like that. And then the map controls. So this is where it's sort of a legend that you can toggle on and off. You can highlight what's added, modified, or deleted, filter by nodes, ways, or relations, and also change the map style between satellite imagery provided by Mapbox, Mapbox streets layer, and also a dark Mapbox map. So depending on, you know, lighting in your room, or what, you know, what is aesthetically pleasing, whatever works. Imagery is nice because then you can also compare with maybe why a user was making those changes based on an imagery set. Although it is only Mapbox, so you might need a second or third imagery set for comparison. So further exploring a change set, what's also nice about this web interface is it gives you the ability to open the change set with an editor of your choice. Currently JAWSM ID, no potlatch support, unfortunately. And then you can also convey this change set information to osm.org itself and view it there, to a Chavi, which again is a great visual diff viewer. A Chavi goes way further back in time, and personally, I'm more of a fan of the visual style of a Chavi over Mapbox's diff tool. So, but they give you the option to jump between either or, and also to load it in JAWSM for further inspection and potentially editing based on what you find. Verifying a change set. So this is what's useful if you're going to use this as a tool for a team. Although it doesn't have to be, you could actually use it for any set of OSM users. But you can verify change sets as good or bad, and also apply tags to those change sets to make them easily searchable and findable, even by people such as the data working group. There's actually a tag listed there called the DWG, so you can alert them to potential malicious edits or bad imports or stuff of that nature. For our use case, I think it's simply at reviewing it as good or bad. The nice thing about that is you can then create, and I'll demo this later on, you can create two lists of change sets that you've reviewed, one a good list and a bad list essentially, and those can be used later on for you to further validate data that your editors or editing groups that you interface with are adding to the map. So you can sort of flag them and then come back to them later for further inspection, which is super nice. It can also keep track of which of your editors, if you're running a team or you're working with a group of editors, are making good edits consistently and which are not, or requiring more review consistently, because those might be indicators of who needs more training, or potentially on the types of edits they're making, on the types of training that they'll need or that you'll need to implement going forward. So that ends my OSMCHA sort of like run through via PowerPoint. Before I jump into OverPass, I'd actually like to do a live demo, but I want to ask if there's any questions before I do a demo of sort of what we just talked about.
I've got a question about a specific change set, but I think it would be better for you to do the live demo first.
Okay, sure. Yeah, and feel free to stop me if I'm going too fast or if you need something else covered. So let me jump to sharing my browser. Can you guys see that?
Yep.
Yeah, no? Cool.
Thanks.
Perfect. Okay. So I'm already logged in, but this would say sign in if you hadn't already logged in on OSMCHA, and it will pop up like a little OAuth authentication box and ask you, do you give it permission and stuff like that. Once you do that, you'll have a little profile page, but let's just quickly go back over this. This is the main landing page. Super simple and easy. It's still in beta, as you can see, but they're making changes to it constantly, so it's really growing. And I think as recently as last week, they made some pretty big improvements on the filtering side. So it's definitely a work in progress, but it's continuing to get better and better as far as I'm concerned, and they're definitely willing to listen to feedback. So you'll see here, there's a list of change sets. These are the most recent in the world, and we'll see if there's any date. So there's a date filter already in place. Typically, I've noticed recently, I actually think it was a recent change that there has to be at least a from date, but not a to date, in order for any change sets to populate at all, which we can test that right now. Yep. So if I take away the from, I essentially get nothing. And I think they impose that to sort of limit the strain on their resources. But it didn't used to be like that as far as I remember. Anyway, if I was to set a from date, I could see all the change sets in the world from that date up until now. And that's quite a bit. And we also get the time of that, and I can order that by whatever I want to order it by. So we can see as of 2 minutes ago, here's a change set. Go down the list like that. Filtering is really powerful. As I said, there's tons of filters here. The bounding box one is nice. They've actually just recently added by location, giving you a number of options here to filter by like searchable names, geocoded names in OSM, which is nice. And then just by creating a bounding box as well, just by drawing it, you can do that as well. You can also limit the size of the bounds, which is nice because people creating change sets, you might find some false positives. People that create change sets that have bounding boxes that span the entire globe, pretty much anywhere you pick to section off a group of change sets, theirs will show up. So you really have to limit like the size of the box in order to exclude the ones who are maybe making mass fixes around the globe, because they're always going to flag essentially. So scrolling down, you can search by flags, reasons for flagging, possible import. These are all imposed, I guess, flags or pre-baked flags by Mapbox, and there's a list of them on their GitHub, and they're still adding to this. I wouldn't trust this 100%. Some of their flags are kind of faulty. For example, like there was a flag at one point, new, and it's still there, new footway created, which in my mind is not something you should flag on. It's something that's really commonly added, and it sort of muddies the water when you're trying to actually identify malicious or bad edits. But there are some good flags like mass modification or mass import and stuff like that, so you can take a look and feel free to take a peek through there. You can look at the status, the review status of stuff. So this went back to if you're going to review a change set, whether you want to create a separate list of those that were reviewed as good or those that were reviewed as bad. So you can select that here and apply those filters. And then really the best portion of filtering, I think, is in the change set details down here, specifically in usernames if you're dealing with managing a team. or if it's a particular import project or something like that, dealing with the source tag or something of that nature. So just for the sake of demoing, for example, my newest OSM username is Mapperson, so I can go ahead and enter that there and hit enter. Now it's not going to change anything on the left-hand side on my change set list until I click apply or save. Other than that, it's going to let me continue to add criteria until I feel like I'm ready. So I can just add my username and I can say since yesterday and apply that filter. And I've had 15 change sets since yesterday, and they're available to me on the left-hand side. And I can see my change set comment, the creation, modification, or deletion of nodes that I've made in each one. And then if it flagged for anything, it'll show up here. So mass modification, I believe, is anything over 200 nodes will count as a mass modification. So again, take the flags with a grain of salt. But I can then click on that and inspect my change set. Again, it will load the diff of whatever I did. I know for a fact that in this particular one, it was in fact, I think it was all attribution changes, so none of the geometry changed. And if my internet was being nice, it would load a bit quicker. And I would be able to see the tag changes. I might actually be able to switch. Yeah, let's see if it's, yeah, it's a little bit better on my tether. Cool. So now we can see the diff. If we went down to filter by actions, we notice that all the nodes here are yellow, which indicates that they were modified, not added or deleted. We could also see that the many tag changes were made. If we actually clicked on one of the features here, we close that a little bit, we could actually see what tags changed, and we could see that this one was altered as well, and I think we removed that because it was a bad tag. We could see that structure type was removed and became temporary equals yes. And from version 1 to version 2, you could see that the user was one of our hot Uganda users and then me making the change. Their change set ID along with mine. So it's really useful for viewing diffs that way in data. Now I could also open this in a number of other tools. One of them, like I said, was Achavi, which is a great visual diff viewer, which runs off the OverPass API. Combination of the OverPass API and the OSM API. And it's a little bit easier for me to view changes in Achavi, but slightly more restricted just in terms of reviewing. You can't really review or place a review state on a change set. It's just mainly for viewing the diff. So back on this list, let's say I was happy with that filter. This was my team. My team was made up of one person, and I wanted to save that, and this was the date range I was comfortable looking at. I could hit save and say this is Dylan's filter and confirm it. And now, since I'm signed in, that'll actually show up on my user dashboard, which is up here in the top left. If I click on that, I'll see my templated comments like we saw in the slideshow, and also my saved filters, which I have a number of, and this is the one I just saved. So for the sake of a test, if I jumped to a different filter and I wanted to go back to the one I just saved, I would simply have to click load from my profile page, and there it is. It's right here. And I could click through my change sets and review them like that. Now verify is up here at the top, good or bad. So this is sort of how you can potentially use this tool to help verify change sets for review further down the road, or if you're running through 100 or so a day, maybe you don't have time to stop by each one and load it in JAWSM and work on the validation through there. This provides a really quick and easy way to do it from the web interface, and then to create a list and come back to it later on for further review. So for the sake of our demo, I've actually already created those lists. So for example, we have a hot Uganda list with a date range as well, going forward from January. And you've noticed that I've reviewed some of these change sets here. So we can pick one, and this is actually Deo's change set. He's sitting right next to me, so I'm sure he won't be upset if I give it a bad review. all need to be changed later. But just to demo how we can review them and how we can then further filter them down the road. So if I wanted to give it a bad review, I could. You can't ever review your own. So if you're logged in as your username, you can't review your own change sets. So you have to be reviewing other people. And then here's the tag list that came up that I mentioned. Again, I don't think these are really necessary unless you're doing like malicious data validation. But if you're just sticking to team stuff, I think the good or bad is good enough. And then, as I showed earlier, the default comments that you can create in your map profile will actually populate here, and I could post it on Deo's change set, and he could actually get that feedback. And I could say, you know, please keep your uploads smaller than a certain amount, or something like that. Post, and Deo would get notified that I'd left a comment and reviewed his change set. I'm not going to post that right now, but I did review it as bad. So,
sorry, Dylan, where do they get the message?
So on the change set itself, if I were to post that, change sets will actually show up with a discussion. So I think I might have actually posted one on one of these, potentially. Let's see if I can show you. Yes, so I already posted one here. So if I were to open this on osm.org, I could actually see that here. Mapperson left a comment. The comment was this, and it will say that I reviewed it in OSMCHA and also give you a link back. Now, leaving a comment in the form of a discussion is not OSMCHA specific, it's OSM specific. So OSMCHA is simply harnessing that power and allowing you to do it right from this interface. But you can actually, these have been around for a long time, and they allow mappers to communicate on change sets that were made and either, you know, confirm or refute changes that were made based on whatever reason, or flag it for the DWG to look at if it's a bad import or something like that. So I could say, please review this and do the exact same thing right from OSM as I did from OSMCHA. The beauty with OSMCHA is it takes a lot of really awesome tools and puts them in one location, which is really nice. It's almost like an aggregate news source, but it's almost like an aggregate validation source. And then it gives you all of these different methods to review and to comment back on OSM changes. So I've reviewed a couple change sets. I gave a few thumbs up and maybe one thumbs down. So I've already created filters based off that. Again, if we wanted to create a filter based off that, what I could do is on my team list, Hot Uganda, I can go down here. Here are our usernames. So I'm filtering for change sets based on all of those users. I could then further filter by the review status. So I could say, okay, those users plus anything that was flagged as bad. Save that as a new filter, and then access that from my dashboard up here. Now I've already done that, so let me load my bad Hot Uganda dashboard, and we'll see one that came in from Alan earlier today, and the one I just reviewed of Deo's. So both of these are thumbs down. Now what this does is this allows me to, again, come back, inspect these again, maybe load them in JAWSM, run validation checks, inspect the data further, and just have a general list on like data that we're definitely not sure is accurate, that we definitely want to come back to and review. So with that being said, one of the other cool things about these filters, I don't know if you've noticed, but on the right-hand side there's this little signal button, and this actually allows you to create an RSS feed, which is really handy because instead of coming back to OSMCHA every time, you can create a bookmark or use one of the many, thousands of RSS feed apps or embeddable widgets on your website or whatever to review and sort of monitor these changes as they're coming in live by your users and by your validators as they're marking them good or bad. So for example, I could look at creating an RSS feed for my bad change set list, and you'll notice that the two that we just viewed are two listed here. You can choose an application to carry that to, or you can create what's called a live bookmark, which is great. So if I click subscribe now, I can just add it to my bookmark toolbar up here and say, these are bad change sets, and hit subscribe. And actually, if I jump over here, notice that I now have a live bookmark up here, and it actually pops up with the change sets themselves. Now I could open this page as is, or I could open up, I could open up the individual change sets and review them on OSMCHA. Once I've looked at one, my live bookmark will actually reflect that I've looked at it by no longer highlighting it as like a new change set showing up in my list. So that's a really convenient way of keeping these lists in like a really easy to use place instead of, again, going back to OSMCHA every time. They really give you ways to, like, you can embed this in a website, you can put it as a bookmark, you can stuff it into an RSS feed application of your choice, or you can simply use the web interface as is presented to you. So there's a lot of variation and like customization available, and it's only growing. So this is one of the reasons OSMCHA is such a great tool in terms of validation, is it's easy to use, it's simplified. You don't have to really know a query language per se, because it's already sort of simplified into basic form filters for you. So, and as I said, aside from saving one to your dashboard, if I wanted to, let's see, if I wanted to make another one for myself and apply it, I would simply have to copy out this link, and I could go and get that exact same list. So I can just ping links back and forth or bookmark that link itself. And it will keep the query that I have saved, including the date range, including the order that I determined for my list. So again, super useful. I think more or less that covers the basics of OSMCHA and what to do with filters. There's a ton of filters, and you can combine them in a lot of different ways. Again, I think the user list, the time, maybe the bounding box, and the review status are probably my main ones, but there's others as well. You can filter by number of creations, modifications, or deletions, source tags, and some other information. So before I do a quick pass over with OverPass and latest changes, are there any questions on OSMCHA and anything else you want me to explain in that regard?
Thanks, Dylan. I've got a couple. I think that there's a way that you can just look for points added using maps.me. Is that correct?
Sure. I think if maps.me enters as a source, then you should be able to, or as an editor, you should be able to as well. Do you have an example change set you could toss me?
I'll find one. Also, okay. So can you see the link in the chat box? This was I did a bounding box for looking at northern Tanzania, and the top change set that was flagged. If you click on the link, I think it should bring it up.
Yes, let me.
For the top change set was one around a mass change of roof direction, which I don't really understand.
Yes, so I think I mentioned this before, but we'll cover it again. When you create a bounding box filter, it's going to really screw you up. What's going to really screw you up is these guys that are making modifications across the entire globe, because their change set boxes will be picked up by pretty much any bounding box filter you make, unless you further filter by the size of the bounds that you allow. So if I was going to create a bounding box filter here, for example.
So are you saying that you just ignore that one then? I mean, I just didn't really understand.
No, there's ways to exclude it from your list, right? So just create a simple one here. And actually, it should be able to just filter based on that. Yeah, so this is the pan. So if I was going to pan down to northern Uganda, I'll get my chords set for me, and then I can also specify the upper bounds of the area. So you can filter change sets that have lower than X times the area of your bounding box. So you can set it to, let's say, lower than 2 degrees. Oops. And then click apply. And I should only get ones that fit that parameter, essentially. That's what you want to do, is you want to use the bounding box size bound. You can read the instructions on that to exclude ones that span the globe, essentially, that span the map, because those will always get picked up. Essentially, no matter where you're creating a bounding box filter, it will always pick those up because they span the entire world. So they'll pick at every corner of the globe unless you filter by the size of the bounding box itself.
Okay, thank you.
I've always found an area of 2 degrees to be fine by my standards, but you may want to play with that just to get it a little more accurate.
Okay, I've put in an example of a Maps.me mapper and then the list of all the Maps.me mappers in February in the chat.
Cool. Okay, let me open that up. Excellent. Okay, yeah. So I'm seeing the list.
Does anybody else have any questions?
So, if there aren't any questions, I can continue on briefly with OverPass and latest changes, and then we could probably wrap it up. Okay, so I'll take that as a no other questions for the moment. Feel free, again, if you think of one later on, you can always email me or Janet, and we can stay in contact. So quickly back to this. I'm just going to briefly cover OverPass and how you can use that, and do a quick demo of that and a quick demo of latest changes, and then questions aside, I think we'll be good to go for the evening. So OverPass and OverPass Turbo. We're going to talk about that. OverPass is extremely powerful, the OverPass API. It's essentially a replicant database of OSM, kept up to date minutely. Although, depending on the size of the change, it can be at most 30 minutes behind the main OSM database. And it also comes equipped with a very powerful query language and filterable options that make it a little bit easier to deal with than accessing the main OSM API. So, pretty much what I just said is what we're seeing on the page here. To access a database over the web, client sends a query to the API and gets back the data set that corresponds to the query. There's tons of OSM wiki documentation on the OverPass API and its capabilities and how you can use it via Turbo and via the command line and via scripting if you're into Python or anything of that nature. I'm going to cover OverPass Turbo today because it provides an easy-to-use web interface for accessing the OverPass API. So OverPass Turbo acts as a web front end. It allows users to write queries and also provides a wizard, if you're not familiar with the query language itself, to help generate queries for you that can help you filter subsets of OSM data. Additionally, OverPass allows you to export any output that you generate in a variety of file formats. Currently, I believe it's GeoJSON, KML, and one other. I can't think of it at the moment. And raw data as well, and GPX, yeah. And raw data. Raw data will give you whatever file format you specify in out, which currently is JSON, but it can also be an OSMXML. And it's also possible to export an interactive map as well. So that can be useful if you want to share or embed that in a website. You can query users and query users over a specific area or even on a specific date and time range using OverPass as well. So some of the same stuff that we just went over in OSMCHA is applicable here. Slightly harder to use, but just as, more or less just as powerful. And again, there's plenty of documentation that exists on the query language itself and how to use OverPass Turbo. So I'm not going to get too much in the weeds there. So for a quick live demo of that, let me jump back here and I will share my screen again. So hopefully everyone can see my screen now. I think we're a little bit behind in terms of sharing, but I should be on OverPass Turbo. Not seeing that reflected there. It's not there. Okay, cool. So this is what the front end looks like. I already have a query set up for Arua and OSMCHA. OSMCHA actually now being part of Arua. We're looking over northwestern Uganda, and what I'm querying for are users, actually just me, and looking for changes made after the 14th, after Valentine's Day, within this area of northwestern Uganda specifically. So you can get down to that sort of granular level with OverPass, and it's nice because you can work a little bit more complexity into queries than you currently can with OSMCHA, although again, they're adding to that to make it a little bit easier and friendlier to use. So if I was going to run this query right now, again, I'm looking for, in these two areas, Arua and OSMCHA, two areas, OSMCHA and Arua in northwestern Uganda. I'm querying nodes edited by the user who is myself, Mapperson, after the date of the 14th of February of 2018. So if we run that query really quick, shouldn't take too long because I don't think I've done too much. And there we go. And as annoying as that might be, I've actually put my Facebook profile picture as the icon for the nodes, just to show that they were from me. But essentially, this will give me a list of all the nodes that I've edited after that date within those two areas in OSM. So it's possible to create a list of your editors and create, query, and share those results with people. You can share permalinks and actually have those run up here on click. So if I shared this with Deo next to me, he would actually be able to click on that link and it would run the query and have all the same styling and query the same results that I just did on my own machine. I could bookmark that link and do it the exact same way. I could also create an exportable map here as an interactive map, which I could then share or embed using an iframe or something else in my website, and then have a map that people could use and interact with that's up to date with OSM data, and also showing all the edits that I made in northwestern Uganda, along with their attribution. So OverPass is extremely powerful. I'm not going to get too much into that, but more or less the idea here is that you can also create a list of users that you want to filter and monitor their changes with. You can export that list in a variety of formats. You can download it directly into JAWSM, or if you want to view it in something like QGIS, QGIS, you could download it as a GeoJSON, a GPX, or a KML and work with the data outside of a web interface. So that's useful. Latest changes, I'm just going to go straight into the next part of it, is an awesome web tool to view changes over an area. And what it will essentially do is query the area, the map, your viewport for changes, and provide that list on the left-hand side, and also provide a jump to link. Oh, we're a bit slow on that. Okay. Cool. Okay. So I think we're on latest changes now. This is useful if you actually don't know who's editing in your area or who are the people making the latest changes in a given area around you. You can actually find their changesets along with their usernames and also see the vector features highlighted that they've actually been changing. From here, you can actually jump to a Chavi as well. They provide a link to that. Explore the user in question. So this might also be a useful tool in identifying users around you who are making edits to the map that you could then take into an OSMCHA list, let's say. You could grab their usernames from this and put it into a list in OSMCHA and then monitor their changes over a span of time or however you wish from there. So those are the three sort of tools I wanted to deal with in terms of validating data outside of a tasking manager sense. All of these tools interact with JAWSM or ID and allow you to load and view these change sets and the data itself in JAWSM. Very recently, and I didn't have time to incorporate it. Yes, so OverPass can actually, thanks for the question, Christian. So OverPass can actually be used in tandem with UMAP. UMAP actually, when you're on, I can actually load UMAP right now and quickly demo that. What's nice about using OverPass to interact with UMAP is that you can keep your interactive map up to date, and UMAP gives you a lot of nice styling abilities to make it a little bit prettier than OverPass. OverPass Turbo is constrained by map CSS, and UMAP has a little bit more flexibility in that regard. So I think you can see UMAP. We'll jump to, actually we'll just jump to create a map. We don't need to load one that I've already made. So if I was going to import data in UMAP, you can actually see that on the import section, slightly behind, using Deo as a point of reference. On the right hand side, yeah, I don't think it's quite picked up my import yet. There we go. When you click on import data, you can browse from a local file. You can paste, like from a GeoJSON, into that paste box down below, or you can provide a URL to OverPass and provide a query string to the OverPass interpreter using your query from Turbo. Now what's nice is from the Turbo interface, you can actually hit, and I know my display is a little behind showing you this, but it'll catch up. You can hit export. I think. Yeah, that's like really behind. I wonder if it would be better off this. Yeah, it could be you too. So what you can do once you're on Turbo is you can hit export and go down to query. And there's an option for compact, and compact allows you to form a nice, pretty clean query string for querying OverPass via like wget or from UMAP. So once you do that, you can just copy that out and provide that as a URL link in UMAP's import box. And you just need to add something in front of it, which I believe I have that here somewhere. Just a little piece of the URL. And then essentially from there, UMAP will load in whatever your output is from that query, and you can then style the map and add your custom icons and all that stuff right from UMAP. So yes, that is totally doable, Christian. Totally interacts with UMAP. And I definitely recommend using UMAP for sure. That's an awesome free tool to create really cool interactive maps.
Thank you. Sorry, can you post the code that you have to add somewhere?
Yes. So let me just post what I just did in UMAP. So that would essentially precede any compact query that you feed UMAP, would be that interpreter data portion there. And then, for example, your query would follow. Your query would follow like that, without query colon. So the whole thing together at the end of the day would look like that. And you would feed something like that into UMAP, and you could feed more than one layer like that. You could keep creating layers like that in UMAP, and it would be running off of that query. And you don't necessarily have to know how to write it like that. Again, Turbo provides export options, one of them being the ability to export your query itself into another formatted query language like OverPass XML or Compact. So it will do that translating for you from like the easy to read, human readable QL that you saw on my page earlier to something that another application or program can easily handle and deal with.
Thank you very much. Do you have any instructions that go through that section? Because I don't think it's not in the slides, is it?
No, I didn't want to. OSMCHA is much more human readable and friendly, and I really want to emphasize like that tool is sort of an aggregate validation tool and is probably the best one out there to use. But definitely, if you're interested in creating interactive maps and stuff like that, there's some documentation on the OSM wiki for how to do that with OverPass and how to do that with UMap. And there's a nice little guide here that I'll ping the chat, which sort of tells you how to do how to make UMap up to date using an OverPass query. So, let me ping it to everyone, not just you, Dale.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yes. So that provides some nice instructions on how to take your OverPass query from Turbo into something that's usable in UMap.
Thank you. Any questions, anyone?
I know it's a lot. It's a lot of information, different tools and whatnot. Definitely play around with OSMCHA. It may just seem like you have a ton of options at first, but you'll realize like how easy it is to actually filter out and create these lists as you go through it. It'll take you maybe 30 minutes to become familiar with everything, and then after that you'll be able to create a custom list in 3 or 5 minutes and save it as an RSS feed or just bookmark it and be able to really monitor changes made by your groups or others around the world in OSM. So it's definitely useful. And by the way, before we go on that, I should say, probably the first thing I should point out is if you click on the question mark up in the top left of OSMCHA, it will pop up with the OSMCHA guide, which will walk you through pretty much everything we covered today and more in a really easy to read format. So if you're unsure of anything I covered or I didn't cover something that you can or are interested in doing with OSMCHA, read through their guide. They've really done a really good job on documenting the process and steps and what everything does. And that, yeah, I think I can actually give you a direct link to that guide as well. So I'll ping that in the chat. So let me just move that.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dylan. That's really useful. So,
of course, yeah.
I will send everybody the recording by email with the links that are in the chat as well.
Cool.
And I'm sure, Dylan, you'll be okay if people have follow-up questions. Is that okay?
Of course, yeah. And I've just seen a message from Christian about emailing him. I'll definitely do that. I'll email everyone the slide deck and some of the other links we looked at. And then, yeah, feel free to come back.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Of course, yeah. Thanks for having us. Thanks for hosting the meeting.
Anytime. Okay. Thank you.
All right, everyone.